All right. So mostly I have been very lazy to create a PPT. So I'll just present using this board, but I hope that it won't take long because I have already added few things uh, in the board, so it won't take long. And also in the fourth chapter, since we are starting the fourth chapter today, so in the fourth chapter, mainly the topics are the structure of MLP, the basic structure of an MLP, and also the problem of overfitting, underfitting in context of the MLP. And then comes the problems or the process of forward propagation backward. And those things we won't discuss today. We'll discuss still the problem of underfitting and overfitting in the context of MLP. So that is what we will mainly discuss, and the construction of MLP, that how we are constructing it, what are the hyperparameters, and basic nitty-gritties. So those are the things that we are going to discuss. And mostly the one thing that I want to mention, that I am hoping this to be not a like presentation session, but more of a discussion session, because I am a very neophyte in this deep learning thing. So definitely. Let make this more of a discussion session. Okay, I'm just turning off my camera because my network bandwidth is not good. So let's start. All right. So the in the last session, Umishari already presented few, like the first and the third chapter of this book, and today from the fourth chapter we are diving into the first true deep network, which is MLP, which is multi-layer perceptron, and in multi-layer perceptron we'll see that what is the single hidden layer thing, and what are the technicalities of that. So the three features that makes one MLP, and MLP is first thing the multiple layers, and we'll discuss why do we need this multiple layers, and then fully connectedness, that is not necessary for a neural network. We will study neural networks where the fully connected nature is not there, but as of now we are studying with fully connected nature, and we'll discuss why that is important. And the third thing and most important thing, the non-linear model, which comes for the first time after we discuss the linear regression or classification problem. So the first thing that today I'll discuss is why do we need this non-linear thing in our neural network, and how do it do this contribute. So the first thing is that in cases where linear model is not an option, then definitely we need nonlinear model. But what are those cases? Most simple case that we can think of is definitely when we are predicting some probability. For example, in the classification problem, since we are dealing with classification problem now, so in case of classification problem, we are essentially predicting the probability. And definitely if my feature space or my say input variables, if you say, those are not bounded, then we cannot say that we can predict the probabilities as a linear form or as a linear function of the feature space, because in that case my probability will also be non-bounded. So that is the most basic thing that we know. So that is a case where non-linear model would be required. And the other case, which is also interesting in terms of you can say image processing, or you can say neural network itself. So suppose let us consider this problem that we are feeding, or we are just sending some image, and we are seeking an output which will tell us whether this image is that of a human face or not. So it is kind of probability prediction classification. So it will give me a probability that yes, this is a human face, or with what probability this is a human face. And so basically how does it do that? When this is a 256 pixel image, so you can see that there are grids in this image. If you see the second picture, so there are grids, and how many grids are there? There are 16 cross 16, so 256 grids are there. And in every grid we can see a number, which is basically the intensity. Since this is black and white, so definitely we only have the intensity value, we don't have saturation or anything else. Now the thing is that here what exactly our feature space is? Our feature space is 256, you can say 256 values or 256 variables pertaining to every single grid or every single pixel. So now in case of linear model, what do we see is that, for example, simple say with single variable, we see that we can say this is a linear model, say. Now here this A will determine whether my y will increase or decrease with increase or decrease of x. But for example, in a probability prediction, say p hat is something which we want. Now, if somehow we are predicting p hat as a function of a linear transformation or as a linear transformation itself of the feature space, say we have a feature space of many variables x1, x2, not necessarily single variable, so many variables we have xm. So in that case, if we are dealing with a linear transformation, so what should it look like? Say b plus a1 x1 a2 x2, something like this. Now here one thing is clear, that if x1 increases, then y or my predicted value will increase or decrease depending on whether a1 is negative or positive. So that is basically tells us that probability of this being a human face will increase or decrease depending on whether this coefficients are positive or negative. But in this particular problem, we can see that even if, say, this particular grid, so this is a particular feature, say this is, for example, say this is my x16. So if it is a linear model, then whatever the coefficient of x16 is, if the coefficient is positive, then whenever my say intensity is increasing in this particular grid, we can say that okay, the probability will increase of this particular image to be image of a human face. If it is negative, the probability will decrease, which is not practical, because the probability or say the chance of this being a human face does not depend so simply on every intensity value. Rather, it depends on a combined value or on a more complex function of all the intensity values. We can't say that a single grid will have more intensity. It means that we have more chance of this being a human face. So that is one thing why we can't use a linear model in most of our complex signal processing or image processing problems. And that is also a case where we might need a very complex neural network to actually process the image. So there are other examples also, and just I would like to ask you if you can think of any other example. These two are examples that kind of most prominent in context of this neural network. But I would ask you any other example that comes to your mind where this linear model won't work and we might need a more complex neural network. Anything. Modeling human thoughts. Okay. Okay. So can you just elaborate on that? What is my feature space? What could be my feature space
Yeah.
for modeling human thoughts?
We enter the modeling of human thoughts, we enter the psychometric space. One set of variables could be, say, the previous, it could be like a time series angle as well. The previous thoughts felt, if we start with even a very simple dichotomy, good thought or bad thought, we could have
Okay.
variables like the kind of food, the kind of sleeping time, the kind of intensity of previous thoughts on the previous day. Uh, but intuitively, it makes sense that even if we put all of this in a linear model, it is
Hmm.
our experience in all of our lives that despite being engrossed in worse and worse situations, we sometimes get positive thoughts, and conversely, even when everything seems all right, we still get negative thoughts. So it seems like there is a non-linear approach to it. Uh, and recently, I saw a video where the Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Penrose, he was also proposing something along the lines that there is a non-linearity in terms of how we think. So that is one thing that I think of.
Okay. So yes, that is a very interesting example. Um, so basically what you said is, if we, rather than this signal processing all those problems, if we just want to predict the effect of certain psychological traits or certain habits on our certain output, for example our mood or say happiness index or anything like that, in that case also we can't say anything linearly, any like linear correlation or any linear dependence, causal effect is not there. It could be something very complex. But yes, definitely that is. And also that one thing just came into my mind. I was reading something about the happiness index, which is something very not very recently, but it is not very widely I would say discussed. So that happiness index is also modeled in a very complex way, and that is also exactly what you said, that it is not depending linearly on anything. It is a very complex structure, and mostly people might now, studies are going on to use this neural network to actually predict the happiness index. So that is, yeah, that those kind of things definitely are good examples. Yes. So first thing was the why do we need nonlinear, and then the multiple layers. That okay, we have done the linear model thing, and we know that nonlinear model is also possible without taking multiple layers. Then why do we need this so many layers and such a complex black box kind of thing? Why do we need that? So that is the second thing which we should discuss. So let us consider a simple classification problem where we have d features. So our feature space is say x1, x2, xd, and also there's a multi-class classification problem. So basically, this x1, x2, xd is the input that you're feeding into the box, and you are expecting probabilities of q classes. So O1, O2, OQ. So depending on the probabilities, you will decide that which class you should classify the individual to. So that is the problem. And now if we look at the picture, look at the here, like the whole multiple layer MLP. So that thing is, it should look like something like this if I have only one hidden layer. Now what is the hidden layer? Hidden layer is something which lies in between your input and output. It is not directly a part of your input, or it is not directly a part of your output, but that is intermediate calculations which is kind of a input to your output. Okay, and output to your input. So that is what the hidden layer should mean. And what is the hidden layer? Let us now consider that everything is linear. Say in hidden layer also, whatever output we are getting from x, that is also kind of linear, linearly coming from x. What I mean is, say this h1, h2, hr, there are r nodes, and r nodes in the hidden layer, every node is a function of x, right? Every node is coming from x, and there are r nodes. From the r nodes we are getting the q outputs, and the outputs are also coming as a linear function of all the previous nodes. So O1 is basically a linear function of this R nodes. Now that is why we call this a completely connected network, because this H1 is a function of all the D features, right? H2 is also a function of all the D features. We are not partially selecting anything. We are just completely taking a function of all the D features. Similarly, in the output also, this O1 is a function of all the R nodes. So it is not that we are only choosing the first two nodes to create this O1, then the second two nodes to create the O2. That is not happening here. It is a completely connected. But we will see that there are examples of neural network where we will only do a partial connectedness. And why do we do that? To reduce the variance, to reduce the complexity of the model. That is the main reason why we sometimes do the partial connectedness. Now we here assume that this hi, all the hi's are something like this. Say your okay, so it's x into some vector a, or a transpose, whatever you can say, where x is nothing but a 1 cross d vector, and a is d cross 1 plus b. So a simple linear thing. And for each hi, we have a different intercept, we have a different a vector. So each hi is a linear thing, and to put it in a simpler terms, we can write that this h vector of all the h things, all the r nodes, can be written as this vector, where every h is a some linear transformation of x. We have different intercept b1, b2s, and different a vectors or different slopes as well. So different coefficient also. So now this can be, I'm just writing it in more simpler terms. So I can write this h, capital H, which is nothing but my first or the only hidden layer values. So h is nothing but this x into some matrix, the matrix which is storing my all coefficient vectors, right? Plus some vector again, which is my intercept values. And this one basically denote the serial number of hidden layer. Here it is the first hidden layer, so it is just the notation. All right, so this is my h, which is coming as a completely connected hidden layer from the input, and it is a linear transformation. Now, okay, this is a linear transformation. Next thing is we come to the output. Now output is also a linear transformation. So output should be something like this. Let us take some other matrix of coefficient, which is we denoted by w2 because it's the second stage, and say b2, something like this. So suppose this is my multi-layer perceptron model and everything is linear here. Ultimately, we are getting the output after getting the hidden layer nodes. But in this particular case, since everything is linear, we can clearly write it like this, right? In place of h, if we put whatever we have got here, like xw1 plus b1, uh, all those things, then basically my output is nothing but a linear transformation of my input. So this is nothing but a linear model ultimately. So I can write it as x into some h, which is w1 into w2, something like that, plus some b, right? So this is again my linear model. Now if we take everything linear in my whole perceptron model, it does not make sense. It is complicating things, but ultimately whatever we are getting will have as much efficiency as a linear model would have, because ultimately this is boiling down to a linear model. So that is one thing which we definitely don't want. So one thing is clear, that we will only go to a neural network if there is non-linearity in the model, and if we want to just feed in that non-linearity in a more complex structure. And how do we do that? There is where the activation function comes into picture, where we need a function, to get into this non-linearity in our model, right? And that is what we call as the activation function. Any question till this? I think this structure, or any comment, anything. Sorry. Okay. So when we talk about activation function, it is nothing but at each hidden layer, rather than taking the hidden layer as a linear function of whatever my input is, I'm taking a function of the linear function. So it is, now it will be sigma, or maybe any function. Sigma is a function, sigma of that linear thing, which is like this. But my output is not any function of my hidden layer. Output is still the same linear transformation. So at the output layer, I'm not applying this activation function, but the activation function is solely for the hidden layers, right? At the hidden layer, I am using this activation function to introduce the non-linearity. And finally, this O is only taking some linear combination of whatever nodes we have in our final hidden layer. So that is the context. Now, just a small thing, that why do we call it activation function? Why such name comes? So this is coming from the neuron or the biological things, that whenever we talk about our brain activity, okay, I think some, please keep record. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's being recorded. So when we say that this is activation, yeah, so when we talk about the brain activities, or we talk about the activities of neurons, what does a single neuron do? It takes some stimuli, it takes some response from the previous neuron or from the source itself, and it just transmits, or it just passes this on to the next neuron. But the thing is that every neuron is not passing on to the whole stimuli to the next neuron. So basically, if I have a neuron here, previous to, like, it is connected to some source of stimuli or some other neuron itself. So what does it do? If from this former neuron some response is coming here, say this response is Z, okay, and then this neuron is sending forward this response to the next neuron. But what happens usually in our brain is that it is not so simple that Z comes from the source or the previous neuron and Z only passes forward to the next neuron. It doesn't happen. It passes forward either a part of Z, or it can also like magnify Z and pass it forward. So basically, it passes a function of Z. And in biological terms, this function itself is known as activation function, because this function determines that how much level of activation will go on or pass on to the next neuron. So that is why this term comes here, that it is not basically taking the whole linear thing, because the linear value itself can be very high. It is just taking a function of it. For example, in a predicting probability, this particular linear function of features can be something unbounded, but we are taking the some function, it can be sigmoid, it can be something else, so that it becomes bounded. And that is what happens with our brain also. When we experience something, some stimuli very high, then it is the task of the neurons to make it stable. It is the task of the neurons to not pass the whole stimuli to the next neuron. It basically absorbs the stimuli and passes on a bounded stimuli to the next neuron. So that is just a why this name activation comes up. So once we understand this activation thing and this output as well, we almost we understand the structure. And the same thing happens when we generalize things, that if we have more than one hidden layers, the same thing will happen, that we will have more than one activation functions or the same activation function for every layer, and things will go on similarly in this fashion. That we can have many hidden layers as well. Sorry, this is H1 W2 plus B2. Okay, so this is what we have regarding the activation function. But the question is that uh, when we are just building this whole structure or layer of the layers, how do we justify the efficiency? Or how, if somebody asks me that I can only take a non-linear model, why do we take so many layers or so many nodes? So in each layer we have seen, right, that we are taking many nodes, but why so? We can take one node only at each layer and we can just take on some functions on that. So that is where the universal approximator concept comes, that yes, there is a concept of approximating a function using a single hidden layer model. And basically it tells us that suppose I have to estimate some function which is very complex in nature. So it can happen, right? We have a feature space and somehow the output is a function of the feature space which is very complex, which is a very complicated function. And say this is continuous. We assume that this is continuous and we want to approximate it. That is the job of this model. So how can we approximate it? We can use any model, but this universal approximator says that in a single hidden layer model, if we just increase the number of nodes in a single layer, say here we have n hidden neurons, right? Or we can say n nodes. So if this n is very large, we can choose a very large n so that we approximate any continuous function as efficiently as we desire. Mathematically, if I put this, then I can say that if fx is my actual continuous function, and if I'm just predicting, or my output here is f hat x, then I can choose n as large as possible. Definitely I can choose n very large, so that this difference absolutely, like for all x, is lesser than some epsilon. Now this epsilon is something that I am deciding the efficiency, and I am choosing for each such epsilon, I can choose a very large n naught, or a very large number of neurons, so that uh, for that large number of nodes I can attain this efficiency. So that is mathematically put, and that is the concept why this kind of layers would work. But also there is another concept that practically this is a mathematical statement, right? But practically we never know that for how large n the efficiency would be attained. So definitely we cannot take infinitely large n to attain a desired efficiency. It would make our the whole model very complex. So rather than taking a single layer with many nodes, we take multiple layers with smaller number of nodes. And it has been empirically shown, there is no mathematical proof, but it has been empirically shown that if we take a single hidden layer model which has like many number of nodes, that can give us same efficiency if we take a multiple hidden layer say model with not that much that many number of nodes. So that is why we might need many hidden layers rather than a single hidden layer with many nodes. So it is the concept of universal approximator that we can justify this thing with, right? So any comment on this?
So towards the end, you essentially said that having one hidden layer with a large number of n neurons, that the effect or efficiency that brings, the same efficiency can be captured by, say, more number of hidden layers, but relatively lesser neurons.
Yes, yes.
So is it maybe is the reason because, like we can see on the picture as well, when we are passing from, say, the first one to the second one, say the first one is the blue hidden layer with four neurons, and the second one is another hidden layer with three neurons. When we are passing from blue to this purple or whatever this color is, we are having multiple connections of one purple being having multiple connections with uh, all the blues or multiple blues, so on and so forth. So this, even though there are
Yeah.
seven neurons in the picture, the total number of linkages possible is being multiplied. So is that how
Yes.
mathematically it makes sense that one hidden layer can be the efficiency can be captured by multiple hidden layers with lesser neurons but more linkages, so that the net result is the same? Is it something like that?
Yes, I can understand what you're saying. I think that could be the mathematical explanation. That definitely, if there is like a single layer and many neurons, the total number of linkages is high. And if we don't put all the neurons in the same, or if we don't take many neurons in a single layer, but we just take many layers with lesser number of neurons, ultimately the total number of linkages or net linkages would be high itself, but our number of nodes are not that high because we're passing on to the next layer. Uh, I think that makes sense mathematically. And I'm not sure what is the mathematical explanation, because this is just a comment with the like with no mathematical explanation, and I tried to find out if there is anything mathematical like solid thing to prove it. But mostly there are empirical studies that says that we can take a deeper we can take a deeper network than a wider network. So this is, you can, I'll just write this down. So this is an important, not important, I mean, this is a famous topic, which is which talks about deeper versus wider network, where you can prefer to build a MLP using a deeper network, which means more number of say hidden layers, which is a deeper network. Also, you can prefer a network with a wider kind of network, which means that a single layer with many nodes. And it has been shown empirically that both will give you similar kind of result. And at some places, a deeper network is more time efficient than a wider network and gives you same efficiency. So most of the times, deeper network is more preferable, and that is empirical study that I found. I didn't I couldn't find any mathematical base for this. So yes, but what you said makes sense to me. Any other comment on this? Anything? Okay. So I'll briefly just mention what the common activation functions are. I'll not dive deeper into it. So mostly ReLU is something that is I would say it is a nonlinear no, nonlinear function, and it is most simple to say. So it is kind of this, where if you plot it, it would be as simple as this. And mostly, definitely, while predicting a probability, it does not ensure that the boundedness, it doesn't ensure that. But there are many modified ReLU function, p-ReLU, and many modified ReLU function that you can look through. That those things are recently developed, and mostly people use modified ReLU function nowadays. We don't use just a ReLU function while building neural network. So that is one thing. And the other function, which is most famous, I hope, which is a sigmoid function, and also it is known as squashing function. It's squashing function because it can map any function, or it can map minus infinity to infinity to 0 to 1. So it is squashing the values. So that is why it's known as also squashing function. And it has a nice property. Its gradient has a property that it is taking highest values towards 0, which also is a bit problematic, because while you are feeding the neural network, sometimes you might end up with values, like for example you are using gradient descent, right? So while using gradient descent, you will use the gradient of this function. And when you are using the gradient and you are trying to like the cost function you have, and you are trying to minimize things. Now if it is like a very large value somewhere, then here the gradient is very less. So in that case, it might get saturated and it might not give you the optimal value. So that is a problem which is generally seen with this sigmoid function. So mostly people use a modified ReLU function rather than taking a sigmoid function. But sigmoid function is simplest to understand, that why sigmoid function works well in most of the cases. And also sigmoid function is smooth. That is also one thing why we should prefer sigmoid function, where ReLU or modified ReLUs are not smooth. There we would deal with a subgradient. We don't have a different we don't have a gradient directly. So in tanh function also, it is similar to the ReLU, to the sigmoid function. I'll just mention what is sigmoid function. So it is this thing which is a CDF, because definitely we know any CDF function would do, because CDF maps from real line to 0 to 1, minus 1 to 1. So that is something uh, here, that is why it is known as the squashing function, right? And this gradient basically is this thing, which is sigmoid into 1 minus sigmoid, if I can put it into words. So tan h is nothing but the tan h function, which is this. So these are mostly used functions. But as I mentioned that in literature, we find this sigmoid function as a most preferable function for its smoothness and other properties. But in practice, we see that sigmoid function hardly can give us a proper or efficient model, because sigmoid function behaves bad when because of this gradient nature. So mostly we use P ReLU or some other ReLU. So now uh, we come to the main thing. We have discussed the structure and all, but now we are going towards the fitting of the model itself. So the basic thing that we want to discuss is what is the main problem of machine learning when we are trying to learn, or we are trying our machine to learn something. Uh, what does it exactly learning? What is it exactly learning? It is learning some pattern. For example, we are giving some data to the machine and it is supposed to learn some pattern, so that when we don't have enough data, or when we try to predict something, when we don't have the data for itself, it can just you can say it can use that pattern to predict. So most simply put, we can say that this is the job of machine learning, that it is learning a pattern. But there could be cases where it is very difficult to learn the pattern. It could be because of the data problem, it could be because of the model problem. Maybe we are deciding the model in such a way that it cannot just find the pattern, it cannot match the pattern in the data. So what kind of problem is that? For example, we have a data like this. Say this is my data. So suppose this is a clear pattern, we can see a clear pattern. But now suppose I don't have much data itself, and I am trying to fit a simplest function for this particular data set. Suppose without just seeing anything, I am proposing a linear function. So the linear function, what would it do? It could be something like this, right? As like, as much as I can understand, this would be something going like going through the averages. So that should be the function. But when this is so simple, when we are actually deciding the function to be so simple like a linear, then my fit is definitely not good, and clearly it is not capturing the pattern. Because if I have to capture the pattern, it should be the curve, right? And it should not be a linear function. It could be sin x, cos x, something like that. It should be something like that, but not a linear function. So here the problem is that here the bias is very, very high, because it is not able to capture the pattern itself. The function is so simplified that no pattern is identified from the data itself. Even if the data is clearly put, that when it is not able to capture the pattern even when the data has some, or it is basically very much simplifying the function, so that my bias is very high. Bias is very high means that my predicted and the distance between my predicted and the actual function is very high. It is not just giving a good fit. The other problem could be that my data itself is, my model itself is very complicated, that it is kind of memorizing the data, it is not finding pattern. So when I say memorizing the data, it means, I'll give an example also. But suppose this is something I have, say I have a very like proper data, which is kind of, I can say that okay, I can fit a linear thing, because the dispersion is not very high, and also it is kind of a linear trend it's showing. So maybe someone could fit a linear function here. But suppose I'm proposing a very complex or a very big polynomial function, or a very complex function, which is, and since the complex function also itself is the parameters are fitted using the data, the complex function will behave something that can fit the data well. So it will go through the data, definitely. But the pattern is not captured here because it is going through almost all the data, almost. But there itself, in our function itself, the pattern is not clear. So if I give it a new data, it would not be like very expert in saying that okay, my pattern is clear and the new forecast or the forecast should be this. It is not very clear in that. So the pattern itself, the pattern is very complicated and it is not giving us a simple pattern. So this is kind of memorizing the data. If I give it a data from my training data itself, the data on which I am predicting, on which I am fitting, then it is basically memorizing and it can exactly give me the value of y, because my function is so complicated that it is almost surpassing all the data, so it can exactly give me the prediction. But for a new data it won't work. So that is when the problem of overfitting comes. So overfitting comes when my model is very complicated, and underfitting comes when my model is too simplified to capture the pattern. So that is the basic idea. But in case of underfitting and overfitting also, there could be two kind of problems. There could be in two ways in which we can get this problem. One is the data size. Suppose I'm not talking about the model or the model complexity, nothing. It could be anything, the model could be anything. But suppose my data is too low, too less, then also the problem of underfitting or overfitting can come, or the data is too high, then also this fitting problem might come. So I'll just give you one example where suppose I am dealing with data where I'm predicting a choice. Like I'm predicting, this is a classification problem, by the way. So in the classification, I'm trying to classify whether four people, I'm just choosing four people. So my data is very less in that sense. And say this, whether this four people, each of them, whether they like a certain food or not. So now you're feeding individualistic, like the, you can say the profile of each Ram, Sham, Hari, Rahi, you are just feeding that blindly. And suppose you have 1 million data for each of them. Say, I'm just talking, say this 1 million data could be some from some biological things, biological features or anything. But suppose you have 1 million feature space, 1 million like input data, X values. But Y is what? Y is 1 or 0, whether they like a certain food or not. So if you feed such kind of data in your machine, what will it learn? It will never learn a pattern. It will memorize the data. So what will it do? It will memorize every feature space and it will tag those feature space with 1 or 0, right? And when you are giving them a new data, then it will not be able to identify it properly. But if you give them a data from these four people, then it can just like retrieve that okay, I remember this is Hari, this is Hari's profile. So it can just retrieve, and that is the problem of memorizing. So in that case, they are not learning the pattern, they are just memorizing the data when my data size is very less. And then that is when we need a proper way of validating. That is where the problem of validation comes. So if we validate it using the training data, we fail, because in training data it has already memorized, so it can give me exactly the value 1 or 0. But that is where we need a new data set to validate this. And we know that test data, why do we need the test data? So this is a problem when the data size is very less. And similarly, for higher data size, definitely we expect more efficient model or more efficient fitting, because now you have a very huge data size, so it has a huge field to learn, right? For lesser data size, it is very restricted. And the other problem could be the model complexity, as I mentioned. So definitely, if my model is very complex, it depends on so many parameters. It could be like a very higher degree of polynomial, right? Say if I have only one variable also, then also it can take a very high like degree of polynomial. Now what happens when we have too many parameters? Now when we are fitting it, these parameters are predicted or fitted, right? And this b hat, a hat, a2 hat, all those depend on our data itself. This all the predicted things depend on the data. So definitely our data will have some variability, and the whole complex model will be highly dispersed, or the variability will be very high, because this b hat, a hat, a2 hat will all the variability of all these parameters will contribute to the variability of the model itself. But if my model is very simple, like a plus bx, where a hat and b hat are my only parameters, then the variability will be less because we are not having very large number of independent parameters, right? So that is why very large, very complex model means that the variability of the model is very high, which is again a problem of overfitting. When the variability is high, the bias is low, because with a very complex model we can accurately fit the training data, but the variance or the variability of the model itself will shoot up. Now, how to deal with that? Here comes the concept of training error and generalization error. So when we talk about the training error, it is less when in problem of overfitting, because we are using the system itself is memorizing the training data. It's not learning. So in that case, we can't only do things with the training data or the training error. So what is my training error? Training error is error involving only the whatever data we have and the predicted thing, right? But this generalization error is expectation of the error. Now, when we say expectation of the error, it means that in training error, these things are coming from, or they are realized values. They are coming from a particular set. But if we keep on taking infinitely many such sets from some distribution, assuming that there is some underlying distribution, then expectation over that will give us the generalization error, and that should be the true picture. Because here I am only choosing one particular data set, but there could be any data set since X is a random thing, and that is expectation over that gives us a generalization error. So there is a result, there is a paper, you can go through. I'm not just talking more into that. There is a famous result by Glivenko Cantili, who talks about the convergence rate and the convergence of this training error towards the generalization error. So basically, this training error will converge to the generalization error at some rate. They talked about the rate itself, which is some important thing, rate of convergence. And but the thing is that this error itself is not a very good estimate of this in terms of the variance when the problem of overfitting comes into play. So that is why we need more such data sets, not only training data, but we need more such data sets so that we can accurately, or at least we can approximate this error in a better way. And that is why we need a test data again. So that is the like the context where we need a test data or other data set to approximate it. Now the problem of overfitting, how can we visualize it, is that suppose this is my model complexity, and we are seeing both the losses, the generalization loss, which is basically the expected loss, the overall loss, and the training loss, which is only on the training data. So definitely when the model complexity increases, the training loss will increase because it is memorizing my training data. It will just reduce the loss and memorize the whole thing. But the generalization loss itself will increase. Why? Because it is only becoming expert of a particular data set, particular training data. It is not becoming expert of the whole population or of any data set. That is why the generalization loss will definitely increase, because again, model complexity does not mean it will work good in any data set, and that is the problem of overfitting. And similarly, underfitting means the model is too simple. There definitely the losses, both the losses will be high because it is not fitting the data well. It is just generalizing it too much. So that is the main problem with both the underfitting and the overfitting. And our aim is to approximate this generalization loss as closely as possible. That is why we need the test data, and also we talk about one other data set. So yeah. So when we only choose the test data, suppose I only choose a training data and only choose a test data, there also we face a problem. Suppose I'm feeding a very complex neural network, say. Now in a neural network, we have certain hyperparameters. So what are the hyperparameters? The hyperparameters are those parameters which you are not directly fitting using the data. Those depend on how well the network works based on the data itself, but it also depends on the one who is like fitting the model. For example, the number of layers. You cannot use the data to predict the number of layers because it depends on your subjectivity, it depends on your objective. So say number of layers or number of nodes also. So this is case specific thing. That is something we talk, like we say that those are hyperparameters, and it depends on the performance itself. Now, suppose on the training data, you are fitting a neural network, choosing some initial value of the hyperparameters. Now, suppose it is not performing that well, then you just change the values of the hyperparameter, and you just okay, so first after fitting you are checking its performance on the test data, right? Suppose on test data it's not performing that well, you change the hyperparameter values and again you check it on the test data, and you keep on doing that, and finally at some hyperparameters it is giving you a good value, right? So then you finalize your model. But after finalizing your model, you should need, or you need another data set where you actually see whether this new or finalized model will work or not. Why do you need another data set? Because this test data itself is the data on the basis of which you are deciding the hyperparameters. So this hyperparameter itself is favorable to the test data. You cannot again test the actual model on the test data. You need now another data set, another fresh data set. So that is where the validation data comes into picture. And why do we need the validation data? So that this test data set itself remains untouched. We are not using the test data set itself to see the or to choose the hyperparameters, but we use the validation data itself to choose the hyperparameters. And this process goes on from the training data, we are fitting it, we are using validation data to choose the hyperparameters, and finally we come with a final model, and then we use the test data to check the final model performance. Roughly speaking, that should be the idea, but definitely the choice of validation data or the choice of test data, those have bigger theories which I'm not going into, but this is the concept. Now tell me if there is any comment or any doubt, anything.
Please, can you repeat what is the validation data and how it differs from the training data? We need
Yes.
not test the test data because it is more serious. Then, what is the
Yes.
validation data? How
So
differ from training data is, and their
right.
difference in use to estimate the layer
Yes.
and the number of nodes.
Right, exactly. So test data is basically a fresh data where you will finally check the performance after fitting. After, suppose you are doing all the fitting and everything, you finally come up with a single model, and now you just submit that model to the validation team, right? You say that from my data, this is the model that I come up with. Now the validation team will get another fresh data and will check your model whether that model works or not on the fresh data. Now this fresh data is known as the test data, which is untouched. While feeding the model, you are not touching this data. This is a fresh
Yes.
data. But while feeding the model, this hyperparameters, what is the hyperparameters? The number of layers, number of node. Now, how do you determine the number of layers, number of node, all those hyperparameters? Suppose in the training data, you are fitting the model, and you need another data to see how this is working, because this number of layers and number of nodes, those are subjective. Those are determined using the performance itself
Yes.
while the thing is going on. So that is why you need a validation data, which is a part of the training data. Like from the data itself, you can just drag out a part, you can just hold that part aside, and you can use that validation data to see how your model is performing on the validation data. And based on that, you can tune the hyperparameters, you can change the number of layers to make it perform well on the validation data. So the model team will have these two data sets, but the validation team will have the test data, roughly speaking. So the model team will use this two data set, will fit using training data, will tune using the validation data, and will come up with a final model. And then this model will go to the validation team, who will use this model to check it using the test data, the performance, and will give the final justice, like final judgment. So that is the way, right? Validation data is used to understand this tuning parameters or the hyperparameters. That is the
Yes.
thing.
Yes. 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 Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So the other thing is, suppose you have a very less like your data is not that large, that you can divide it into three parts. Suppose you have a data. Now you are just putting aside a part of it as a test data. Whatever training data you have, that is not very large, and you cannot basically hold out a part of it as a validation data, because it is not that large. So that is where we can use the k-fold cross validation, where I am not basically dividing it into validation or training test. I'm like folding the data into k folds. K can be two also. K can be like anything, but definitely k is also here kind of hyperparameter, right? Because k is something that depends on the performance itself, that you decide then and there. So this, suppose my data is folded into this k folds, and what you do exactly is, suppose this is my first fold. At the first step, you just fit your data based on this three folds. So basically you are dividing your data into four parts, and based on the three any three parts of the data, you're fitting it, and then using this as a test data and finding the error or cost, whatever you say. Cost, you can say it cost also, or error, whatever. So you're finding the cost based on the left out data set. Then at the next step, you're leaving out the second set, and you're choosing the first, second, and third set as your training data. You're fitting it, and then you're feeding it into the test data, which is the second set now, and now you are calculating the cost. Similarly, you will have such four values of cost when you are choosing your test data as any one of these four sets, and then some average measure. It is not necessarily simple average. Should be some average measure of this cost to give you the final cost. So roughly speaking, that cost you are minimizing, or not minimizing, that cost gives you the performance value. Basically, this is not cost, you can say error actually, not cost, because cost is something that is used in the training part of the model, where you are just minimizing the cost. But here it is not cost, it is error basically. So just repeating it, you are dividing the data into k folds. You are just leaving out one fold and using the remaining k minus one fold to fit the data, and then that one fold is used as the test data to calculate the error. You do the similar thing for all the folds, and you get k many errors, and some average measure of those errors give you the final measure of error. So here you don't need the validation data, test data, training data separately. You are basically doing it in k folds. So that is another way of doing it. Now, once you know the problem of overfitting is there, for example, in this particular case, if the model itself works very nicely in the validation data but works very poorly in test data, it means there is some problem of fitting. It could be underfitting, it could be overfitting with the model itself. So this validation can only give you a judgment whether the problem is there or not. It can only diagnose that yes, the problem is there. But once you understand that yes, with your model there is a problem of overfitting, once the validation team tells you, then what should you do? So there are two ways. There are many ways, but in this book itself, two standard ways are explained in the context of neural network. That in neural network, what we can do. So first thing is weight decay. Simply put, if we consider just a linear function, say W transpose X, where X is the features definitely. So if we have very high number of features, say this number of features very high, then definitely the norm of the weight, or the total weight, or say the norm of the weight vector will also like tend to be higher, because this is nothing but the coefficient vector, by the way. So norm of that is a measure of the weight itself. So suppose, or you can say norm of it is a measure of the complexity of the model. Higher the features, higher should be the norm itself. So one way to do it is to introduce a regularization, is to introduce the factor, this norm of this thing, this factor to the cost itself. Suppose your cost is this, like you are minimizing this cost, which is nothing but your predicted value minus your actual value, and square of that, and some of that you're minimizing it to predict this BEW, all those things. But now you don't do it. What do? You introduce another regularization thing, where you are minimizing the cost, but also you're minimizing the complexity of the model. So what exactly we are doing here, that while minimizing the cost, our model can be very complex, because definitely more complex the model is, more better the fit is on the training data. But you don't want to sacrifice that thing. Don't want to lose that. So you are adding another term which is basically penalizing your high complexity. If the complexity is becoming higher, this term, the second term will be high. But when you are minimizing the whole thing, so it is minimizing the cost also, and it is minimizing the complexity also, so that it balances out each other. So you're minimizing both the complexity and the bias, or to say you're minimizing both the variance and the bias, so that the trade-off is well maintained. So that is the idea roughly. And the lasso regression, the ridge regression, those are definitely kind of regularization. And in neural network also, we in the same way we use this. Just in place of cost function, you just introduce some penalty. It could be anything based on based on the data in your hand. So that is one way of doing it. And the other way of doing it, the last thing that we discussed today, is the dropout method. The dropout method is another method how you can do this thing. So there is a paper and there is a book also where this dropout method is very well discussed, and this book itself refers that literature. And there the dropout is not in the context of neural network, but it is just in the context of regression and other predictions. So there it says that what is the problem of overfitting exactly. Problem of overfitting is that your model depends too much on the data. So your model is not robust. Your model is becoming rigid. So if you change the data itself, your model will not perform well. So your model is highly dependent on the data. So now what you do, you add certain perturbation in the data. So that is the concept, that while predicting things, while feeding things, in the data itself, you add some random noise, right? So that there is some robust concept of robustness comes into picture. That even if some random noise is introduced, after that random noise, whatever feed it gives us, that is not depending fully on the data, because now we have a random noise. Now, since this is a random noise, it can be anything. It is not on our hand. And also, since this data itself is not the only thing here, we have a random noise also. That is why now the predicted model is not fully depending on the data. So that is one way of understanding the perturbation. This is what this is a concept introduced in the actual paper, but in this book they have like used this concept to like how we can use it in the neural network context. That is what we see here, how they are introducing the perturbation. At each layer we are dropping out the nodes with a certain probability. So at each layer it does not like necessitate that every node will be there or every node will be contributing in the fitting process. For example, you have a particular node, say the node is this, the value of the node is this. So now the modified value would be 0 with probability p, or previous value by 1 minus p with probability 1 minus p, right? So basically, if I have many nodes, say this is my nodes, and value of this node is h, but now I'm introducing a perturbation, so that my new value of the node is h dash, which is this thing. So which can be 0 itself, or which can be h by 1 minus p. Now why this h by 1 minus p things comes? Because expectation of h dash now is same as h. So just to keep the expectation same, so that finally in the output the expectation doesn't change and many other calculation doesn't change. That's why this kind of structure is coming, so that ultimately the expectation remains same, but few nodes can just go away with a random factor, with a random chance. So suppose you have a before dropout you have the completely connected neural network, but now you don't know, since you are introducing this perturbation. It can happen that while predicting, at some layer few nodes will just fall out, and that is why the final output will not depend too much on the data, because of there are missing data problem now, like you don't have the complete data. At certain layer you're just dropping out things randomly. So that is how this perturbation can be introduced. So that is the last thing. After that we have the concept of the backward and forward propagation. That those things we will discuss in the next session, hopefully. And just let me know if there is any comment or any doubt on whatever we discussed.
So in
Can
this
you please
last, yeah, please, Vaidik, go ahead.
okay. Can you please explain how adding that regularization term actually helps reduce that complexity?
Yes, right. Yeah. So yes, so this one. So for example, you have a if you have a very large model, for example, this a plus bx is a simple model, and a very large model could be say it should be b plus ax, because just a second, just to keep the notation same throughout, I'm just using the same notation. So say you have this b plus ax. This is the most simple model you can say. But another model you can say that it can be b some polynomial. It can be say b plus a1x plus a2x square plus a3x cube plus say 50 till 50. I have these things, right? Now this is a very complex model, And this is a very simple model. Now, this complex model is depending on too many things. This is a polynomial, but it could be several features also. Like this can be x1, x2, all those things as well. Like here, I'm using the same feature, but I'm just taking power of that. But you can say that there are 50 features. That also is a complex model where you have too many features and you're using too many features. So now the norm of this, what is this? What is the norm? It is basically for this simple model, it should be say b square plus a square if you're considering also the intercept. Otherwise, it is a square, and here it should be b square plus sum of all the ai squares, right? So more complex it is, more larger this term is. And a way to restrict your complexity is to restrict this term, right? If you're restricting this term, if you're like saying that this term cannot be greater than a certain bound, then your model cannot be too complex. Maybe the power maybe it is a high, like higher order polynomial, but in that case what will happen, that each value will lose its importance. Each value will be decreased to a very large extent. In that case also, like finally the contribution of each term will decrease, and that is how you can like put a limit on the complexity. Or other thing that can happen in lasso, we have seen that if we don't use this L2 this particular penalization, we can also use this penalization mod of b plus mod of a, which is L1 penalization. This is known as lasso regression. So where this penalization is used, this is also a way to measure the total weight, you can say the total weight of all the coefficients. So if you somehow limit that, if you somehow put a bound on that, then you are putting a bound on the complexity. Now minimizing this itself, if you are not considering the cost, if you're not considering the penalty, then minimizing itself means that you choose as complex a function as possible. It can be anything, so that ultimately on the training data the cost is minimized. But now if I add this term also, it cannot like it cannot minimize it autonomously, it cannot minimize it independently. Now it has to take into account this factor as well, because if this is minimized too much, if the model becomes too complex, this part will shoot up, but it has to minimize both the things simultaneously. So it cannot make the model too complex or too simple, because if the model is too simple, then also cost will shoot up. If the model is too complex, then this part will shoot up. So it has to sacrifice, like it has to like do some optimal kind of thing, so that both the things are taken care of, right? So that is how the penalization term works, but not necessarily this is not the only choice of penalization. There are many choices of penalization, but now as of now I just give it like give example of just the L2 norm. It can be any norm, it can be anything. Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, when we have to tackle a problem, how do we decide between what to use, the L1 norm or the L2 norm?
okay, so there is, for example, when you use L2 norm, this is a like a part of a bigger literature, but when you use L2 norm, you will see that in L2 norm, by minimizing that, it is basically minimizing each coefficient, like each value. If you have W1, W2, W3, say, then basically it is decreasing each one of that to like minimize the whole thing. But for lasso, it is basically it like few of the terms will vanish to give you a minimum value. So the concept is that for if you want to do a feature selection means that, just I'm very roughly saying because there are this is a bigger part. So feature selection means if you have many features and you don't want to keep all the features, you want to just do away with few of those, you want to make coefficients of few of those zero, exactly zero. So in that case you can use lasso regression, because the lasso regression, you can the minimization of lasso, minimization of that penalty is such that it will it will bring down few of the coefficients to zero itself. That is the separate problem of optimization that I'm not going into. But ridge regression is will not make zero. Ridge regression will not make anything zero, but it will decrease everything together, kind of thing. So it will not basically eliminate any feature, but it will just decrease the coefficient of everything. So if you don't want to eliminate any feature, but you just want to decrease the whole cost and the whole say penalty, the whole weight, then you can use ridge regression. I can like we can discuss this in more details later on, but as of now I think this does that make sense when we use it, we use lasso or reach.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Is there anything else? I think Pratik, you were saying something.
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, yeah, thank you very much for your talk. The first one is, uh, it's more of a curious question. The activation functions, when you were discussing them, I noticed that none of the activation functions, all of them were non-linear, but none of them were periodic. So what if, is there some literature on what if sine x or cos x is used as an activation function, or why it cannot be used as a activation function?
Okay, so first thing is that in that case, it won't be a like invertible function in the whole range of features. Like if x is not bounded, then a cos or sine, that you can't invert it back. And the main problem uh, I'm just thinking if there is any other problem on using that function, sine or cos. Mm, I think that okay. So
I mean, the way I internalized it was
hmm,
you just need an activation function which is non-linear.
yeah,
So,
I think that is the thing. Like usually activation function can be anything, anything non-linear. It can be like yes. I think the only thing we need is the non-linearity. I don't think there is any problem with taking sin x or cos x in that sense. Even if that is not invertible, I'm just thinking that in the back propagation or forward propagation, anywhere we don't need the invertibility exactly. Because yes, I think it can be taken. They are just the sigmoid and these things are when you are predicting a probability, then you need this Quotient property. That's why this sigmoid is well used. But even some like modified version of ReLU should have a kind of periodic property, as much as I can remember. Uh, I don't exactly remember the example, but I think that that should be like that should work also.
okay, yeah, that is also something I'll look up. Second thing is towards the end when you were saying about, what was it, dropping out or something,
Yeah, yeah,
which is deliberately making some neurons or hidden layers or neurons and hidden layers disappear. Yeah, this over here.
yes.
So is this also somehow connected with, I know I'm jumping a few topics over here, but is this the essence of it? Is it connected with the attention thing in LLMs? Because to describe it very simply, attention is, I think, deliberately not consuming all information and selectively putting emphasis on some blocks of information, because that is how the human mind works. When we are reading a page, we are not
Yes.
taking each word literally. It's the combination of words and an abstract idea that those come up with, that is what we save in or register in our heads. That is how we remember that page or the chapter or the book. So this
Yes.
thing, when I first saw it on the screen, it somehow connected me with that we are deliberately leaving out information. So is there a connection with that, or is it just that these two literatures are far apart? There's no connection as such.
Um, I'm not like I only know the term LLM. I'm not very aware of that. But for NLP, I would say that in NLP there are few like only I know the very basics. I don't know much of it. But in NLP also, while doing the while processing the words and while processing all those things, we deliberately remove things so that it can learn. We deliberately remove part of words, part of sentences, so that it can predict and it can learn by itself. That is how NLP works. And I think that LLM also since it the building block of LLM is coming from NLP, so I think that also should work on the same logic. I think so. I'm not sure. I should. I need to just go through things, this LLM and all those things. I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks. Anything else?
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
some.
Sir. Okay, okay, continue,
No, no,
please.
please continue. Please continue.
Yes. I have a question on the where you have written that the expectation and error before taking expectation or error this side.
Yes, the training error and generalization error, that part you're saying, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. In what is the difference in the first type and there's those two after taking expectation?
Okay. So basically, when you have only a training data, that is a realization of a random variable. Because you have a random variable x, when you are getting the training data in your hand, that is not the whole population, that is just a part of it. You're realizing the random variable. Suppose x is, say, weight, or x is any variable, but the training data is not the whole population, it is a set of it.
Yes.
So when on the training data you are fitting the model and you're calculating the error, it is not giving you the error on the whole population, or it is not giving you any, like, I would say, it is not giving you the overall picture, it is just giving you the picture on a smaller data set. But that would be misleading because you are not having the whole data set. That is why, if you consider that this training data, it is coming randomly from a population. Suppose now you are drawing from the population many such training data, as to say, or many such data, like data, sorry, yeah, so many such data you are drawing, and on those data you are calculating the error, and then you're taking some average. That average is the expectation if you are basically training, taking infinitely many such samples. This is the same concept of expectation that we that comes in the definition of the expectation itself. What is expectation? It is nothing but when we are taking the average on the whole population, when we are drawing infinitely many times, then we can capture the overall picture, and that is what the expectation is. So this is, you can say, this is the single realization. So this is a random variable, you can say, because this depends on x. But since the whole thing is a random variable, you can take expectation of that. So this is just the expectation of the random variable. The
Okay.
random variable is the error.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, yes. Someone else also was asking something. I'm not sure
Yes,
who. Yeah.
he asked a
Yes,
very
please.
interesting question regarding periodic functions. So I have a doubt regarding that. For example, if
Yeah.
we have periodic functions like sin x and cos x, so now we
Yes.
have a gradient descent trying to achieve a minima, but we have multiple minimas over multiple x's. So will it pose a problem of some sorts?
Okay. So you are taking, say, sine function, then you're, yes, that is one thing, that is something that depends on the range itself. So you're taking the function on your x, whatever you have, whatever feature space you have, and then you're calculating the cost function, then the gradient descent you're doing. um, so yes, I think, like, if suppose, okay, let me just go to this part. Um, that depends on few things. One is that, um, definitely you are trying to reach a single minima. You're trying to reach a particular target. It depends on the initial value that you're starting with. If the initial value is somewhere like far from the actual minima and like the target and the actual parameter, you say, it's far from that, then definitely it will be stuck in some of the other minimum, like anywhere in between, because the structure is such, it's like that. But that is one thing. And if you see the gradient also, that should also have a periodic nature if you take sine or cos anything. So in that case, if the gradient itself is periodic, it should, I'm not sure, but it should impose a problem if the initial value is taken very far away, or if the initial value is chosen very wrongly, then it could be a problem. But if the initial value is at us, like within a certain range, then possibly it will converge to the actual parameter value. That is what I feel, but definitely I should see that what actually happens with this periodic function. That is an interesting question itself. Okay, maybe I'll come back to it in the next session. I'll have to do some homework on this periodic function. Okay. So yeah, anything else on this other than this periodic function? Because I am not really very sure how it works. I need to look through this, all these things, periodic things. So anything else from whatever we discussed today? Any other comment or any other doubt?
Excuse me. Here you have pointed out the Lasso and rigid equation. Already you are. taking class on this topic, or it will become in some next session, or
Yes. Actually, this fourth chapter was, I mean, it's not very big, but in the fourth chapter, there are certain topics. There is a coding part also. So that's why I thought it's better to split
oh,
it into two sessions. So I maybe in the next session, I'll do the remaining part. And then Umisha again will take up from the after that.
okay. Because I am not aware of those topic. I have only heard from this name only. Okay.
Okay, I think I'm very neophyte to this, so it's all right. We can keep on learning. It's okay.
Yes, yes. Interesting.
Anything else? Okay. I think then we can stop it here and thank you all for joining. I like, I don't know if I am doing justice to this chapter, but definitely I have faith in all of you. Your questions and all those things will definitely make us learn a lot of things. So, yes, thank you a lot. We'll
Yes,
meet you
thank
in the
you
next
for
session, hopefully.
this entire session.
Yeah. Thank you for answering those questions as well.
Yeah, I just tried. Thank you.
Thank you.